The air hung thick with summer heat as Emma Harrison disappeared from the quiet town of Pinewood Hollow, Tennessee. Population just under 2,500. That June night in 2008, there was nothing but cricket songs and the occasional flicker of fireflies along the road to Blackwater Creek Bridge. At 10:30 p.m., coworkers waved goodbye as Emma, a talented 24-year-old music teacher with long auburn hair, left the community center, her violin case clutched to her side. She drove her blue Honda Civic slowly down Main Street, taillights fading into the darkness. A local recalled seeing her headlights vanish around the bend near the Cumberland River. From that moment, Pinewood Hollow was never the same, for Emma left and never returned. What happened in the next hour would haunt the town for 16 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In the summer of 2008, Pinewood Hollow suffered under the weight of Tennessee humidity, with evenings that seemed to stretch into infinity and nights filled with the gentle hum of cicadas. Against this backdrop, Emma Harrison pursued her passion for music, teaching violin to children at the local elementary school while performing with the regional orchestra on weekends. Emma was known for her gentle spirit, her ability to coax beautiful melodies from even the most reluctant students, and her dream of opening a music school for underprivileged children. On the evening of June 12th, Emma stayed late at the community center, helping organize a summer music program. The old brick building with its worn wooden floors had become her second home, a place where children's laughter mingled with the sounds of practice scales and hesitant melodies. Emma had been excited about the upcoming recital, telling colleagues her students were finally ready to perform. Around 10:30 p.m., Emma packed her violin, said goodnight to the janitor, and stepped out into the warm Tennessee night. The streetlights cast yellow pools on the sidewalk as she walked to her blue Honda Civic, parked beneath an old oak tree. She placed her violin carefully in the passenger seat, as she always did, treating the instrument like a precious companion. The night air carried the scent of honeysuckle as Emma drove down Main Street, past the hardware store, the diner where she often had breakfast, and the library where she borrowed music books. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother Sarah asking, "When will you be home?" It went unanswered. Just after 10:45 p.m., a couple fishing by the Cumberland River reported seeing headlights move across Blackwater Creek Bridge before disappearing around the bend. The bridge, with its weathered wooden planks and metal railings, connected the town to the county highway. The river below flowed dark and silent, reflecting nothing but the silver glow of a half-moon. The blue Honda crossed the bridge, tires rumbling on the old wood, sound echoing into the night. That was the last confirmed sighting of Emma Harrison. In the darkness that followed, the young music teacher and her car vanished without a trace, leaving a void that would become Pinewood Hollow's longest mystery. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through the curtains of the Harrison family home, Sarah Harrison awoke with a knot of worry in her stomach. Emma's bed was untouched, her room exactly as it had been the day before. All night Sarah had sent texts and made calls, each one met with the endless ringing of an unanswered phone. By 7 a.m., Sarah called her son Michael, who lived in the next county. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Emma didn't come home last night. Her phone's dead." "Something's wrong, Michael." "I know it." Michael promised to come right away, carrying with him a growing sense of dread. Together, they drove to the Pinewood Hollow Sheriff's Office, a small brick building with an American flag hanging limply in the still morning air. Inside, Deputy Tom Wilkins listened to their concerns with a practiced calm that bordered on indifference. He jotted notes in a worn notebook, suggesting Emma might have stayed with a friend or decided to take an impromptu trip. "She's 24, a grown woman," he said, glancing up from his notes. "Maybe she just needed some space." Sarah stood firm, her hands gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Not Emma. She would never do that. She texted me she was coming home. She had lessons to teach today." The deputy's expression shifted slightly at Sarah's determination. After a few more questions, Sheriff Jack Morgan agreed to open a missing persons case. "We'll start looking into it," he assured them, though his tone suggested he expected Emma to turn up on her own. That first day, deputies contacted Emma's colleagues from the community center. All confirmed she had left alone around 10:30 p.m., seeming perfectly normal, talking about preparations for the next day's lessons. From the moment she drove away, Emma's digital footprint ended. Her phone's last connection was to a cell tower near Blackwater Creek Bridge. Speculation began almost immediately. Maybe her car broke down. Maybe she had an accident. Maybe something worse. By afternoon, the sheriff organized a search along the roads Emma might have taken home. Deputies in patrol cars drove slowly along the winding country roads, scanning ditches and woods for any sign of the blue Honda. Michael joined volunteers, walking the roadside, his eyes searching every shadow and gully, hoping to find some trace of his sister. Community members, many of whom knew Emma from her music lessons or performances, gathered with flashlights and walking sticks, combing through the underbrush near the river. That evening, the local news station ran a short segment showing Emma's smiling face from a recent orchestra performance, urging anyone with information to contact the sheriff's office. But as daylight faded, hope began to dim. The search had yielded nothing. No skid marks, no broken glass, no sign that Emma Harrison had ever driven these roads that night. By the third day, the search intensified. State police helicopters scanned the Cumberland River and surrounding forests. On the ground, K-9 units followed scents through thickets and fields, while dive teams searched the deepest parts of the river near Blackwater Creek Bridge. Media coverage grew, with Emma's photo appearing on regional news stations. The image of her sitting with her violin, auburn hair falling over her shoulders, green eyes bright with passion for music, became familiar across Tennessee. The headline, "24-year-old music teacher missing," appeared on newspapers and television screens throughout the state. But with attention came rumors. Some whispered Emma left due to secret debts. Others suggested a hidden relationship gone wrong. These rumors wounded Sarah deeply, who knew her daughter lived simply and openly, dedicated to her music and students. Michael weathered the speculation stoically, focusing instead on supporting his mother and continuing the search. He printed hundreds of flyers, driving to neighboring towns to post them in shop windows, gas stations, and community boards. By the fifth day, the search was officially declared inconclusive. Sheriff Morgan held a brief press conference outside the station, promising the investigation would continue, but acknowledging they had found no concrete leads. "We're exploring all possibilities," he stated, his face stern under the brim of his hat. "At this time, we have no evidence of foul play, but we're ruling nothing out." Pinewood Hollow changed in the weeks that followed. The town that once left doors unlocked now turned deadbolts each night. Parents who had let children walk to school began driving them instead. Emma's missing posters became a somber fixture, her smile watching over the town from telephone poles and store windows. At the elementary school, Emma's students gathered for a special assembly. They played a simple melody she had taught them, the notes wavering with emotion. Many children cried, missing the teacher who had shown such patience and kindness. The principal announced a scholarship in Emma's name, ensuring her dedication to music education would continue. Sarah Harrison kept her daughter's room exactly as she left it. The violin stand in the corner, music sheets spread across the desk, and a half-read novel on the nightstand remained untouched, as if Emma might walk in at any moment and pick up where she left off. Michael threw himself into keeping the search alive. He created a website dedicated to finding Emma, updating it with any information, no matter how small. He organized weekend search parties, focusing on areas not thoroughly examined by authorities. But each effort ended the same way, with silence and unanswered questions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As months passed, the intense early searches, prayer vigils, and front-page stories gradually faded. After 6 months without leads, Sheriff Morgan called the Harrisons in for a meeting. His office was small and plain, with certificates on the wall and a stack of case files on his desk. His voice was gentle but firm as he explained that the active investigation was being scaled back. "We'll keep the case open," he assured them. "Any new lead will be followed up, but without fresh evidence." He left the sentence unfinished, the implication hanging in the air like a weight. To many in Pinewood Hollow, it felt like the Emma Harrison case was destined to remain unsolved, filed away in a cabinet with other mysteries time had failed to resolve. At the sheriff's office, her green folder was placed in a drawer marked "Open Cases," alongside others that rarely saw daylight. But for the Harrison family, it was never over. Sarah, her hair graying from stress and grief, wrote letters to newspapers and politicians, refusing to let her daughter's name fade into obscurity. Each letter began the same way: "My daughter Emma Harrison is a gifted music teacher who deserves to be found." Michael maintained the website, updating it religiously on the anniversary of Emma's disappearance. He continued posting flyers, replacing those damaged by weather, ensuring his sister's face remained a constant presence in Pinewood Hollow and beyond. Initially, their efforts received support from the community. Local businesses displayed Emma's poster prominently, and neighbors brought food to Sarah, offering comfort and prayers. But as years passed without progress, that support began to wane. People averted their eyes when Sarah approached, quietly removing weather-beaten flyers from their shop windows. Some whispered that the Harrisons should learn to accept and move on. But how could they, when the truth remained hidden somewhere in the darkness? How could a mother forget her child? How could a brother stop searching for his sister? 5 years passed, then 10. Pinewood Hollow remained a small town with quiet streets and the Cumberland River flowing steadily past. But Emma Harrison's memory lingered like a ghost, present but unspoken. Blackwater Creek Bridge stood as it always had, its wood weathering with time, a silent witness to whatever happened that June night in 2008. Tourists passing through occasionally heard the tale of the missing music teacher, shivering as they drove across the bridge, imagining what secrets might lie beneath the water's surface. In Pinewood Hollow homes, parents used the story to warn teenagers, "Don't drive alone at night. Remember Emma Harrison." But beyond these cautionary tales, a heavy silence prevailed. The community had learned to live with its unsolved mystery, carrying it like a stone in their collective pocket, always there, but rarely acknowledged. Sarah continued living in the family home, keeping Emma's room as a shrine to her missing daughter. The violin remained on its stand, though the strings had long since lost their tension. Each night, Sarah said a prayer before bed, asking for answers that never seemed to come. Michael married and had children of his own, but his heart carried an unhealed wound. He named his daughter Emmeline, a subtle tribute to the aunt she would never know. Each year, on the anniversary of Emma's disappearance, he drove to Blackwater Creek Bridge, sitting in silence as the water flowed beneath, wondering what secrets it held. After 16 years, Pinewood Hollow had grown accustomed to living with its haunting. People stopped talking about Emma openly, stopped searching, stopped wondering aloud. But in their hearts, her disappearance remained a collective nightmare they never fully escaped. And in that seemingly peaceful silence, the Harrison family's pain continued to bleed, waiting for the day when truth would finally surface from the shadows. 16 years after Emma Harrison vanished, Pinewood Hollow had become a town living with its ghost. But truth began to resurface through strangers driven by a simple mission, documenting forgotten rural bridges. The historical preservation team, calling themselves Heritage Builders, was founded by two middle-aged historians, Mason Campbell and Liam Turner. Both former civil engineers with a passion for architectural history, they'd left corporate careers to pursue a calling that combined their love of history and rural structures. Their work was straightforward, photographing, measuring, and cataloguing historic bridges across the American South, advocating for preservation of these disappearing landmarks. But as they documented these structures, Sometimes their work intersected with local legends and unsolved mysteries that haunted small towns. Heritage builders operated on small grants and donations, traveling Tennessee and neighboring states in a converted van packed with camera equipment, drones, measurement tools, and laptops. They recorded oral histories from locals who remembered when these bridges were built, creating a digital archive of America's rural infrastructure before time erased it completely. Mason, with his salt and pepper beard and patient manner, was the team's spokesperson, often appearing in educational videos about historical preservation. Liam, quieter and more technically minded, handled the drones and technical measurements, ensuring their documentation was academically sound. In April 2024, after receiving a tip about Blackwater Creek Bridge's unique construction techniques, heritage builders arrived in Pinewood Hollow. The town had no major historical attractions, but the bridge, built in 1932 during the Great Depression, represented a distinctive regional style worthy of documentation. For the team, this was just another entry in their growing database, unaware that beneath the currents lay an unfinished story. That morning, spring sunlight dappled through new leaves, casting shifting patterns on the Cumberland River. Mason stood on the riverbank, speaking to Liam's camera in his measured professorial voice. "We're in Pinewood Hollow, Tennessee, documenting Blackwater Creek Bridge. Built in 1932 by the Works Progress Administration, it features a unique combination of timber decking and steel supports that characterizes Depression-era infrastructure in this region. Today, we'll be creating a complete digital record of this bridge before such historical structures are lost to time." Ta-wa-da-da. Liam prepared the drone, eyes focused on the control screen as it rose above the bridge, capturing aerial footage of the structure. He'd often said each bridge had a story to tell, not just of engineering techniques, but of the communities it connected and the lives that crossed it. Townspeople gathered curiously on the bank, some pointing as the drone hovered above the bridge. A few older residents approached Mason, eager to share memories. An elderly man leaned on his cane, voice weathered by time. "That bridge has secrets, you know. Folks have gone missing crossing it. Most famous was that music teacher." Mason nodded politely, having heard similar tales in dozens of small towns. Every bridge seemed to have its ghost story, its local legend. He thanked the man and continued setting up his equipment, preparing to measure the bridge's dimensions. Before starting their detailed work, Mason performed his usual ritual, taking a moment of silence to appreciate the structure's history. "These bridges connected communities," he often said. "They deserve our respect." None of them imagined they were about to uncover a secret buried for 16 years. The morning proceeded methodically. Mason measured beam widths and support distances, photographing distinctive features and construction techniques. Liam guided the drone down the length of the bridge, capturing high-resolution images from every angle. The device hovered near the water, recording the underside of the structure. As Liam watched the drone footage streaming to his screen, he noticed something unusual in the water, about 20 yards downstream from the bridge. A metallic reflection caught the sunlight, distinctly artificial among the natural riverbed. "Mason," he called, brow furrowed. "Take a look at this." Mason peered at the screen, adjusting his glasses. The drone's camera showed a dark shape beneath the water, partially buried in silt, but clearly man-made. Something with straight edges and what appeared to be a curved roof. "Looks like a car," Mason said, tapping the screen. "Probably been there a while, judging by the sediment buildup." Liam guided the drone lower, hovering just above the water's surface. "Should we report this? Environmental hazard at minimum." Mason nodded. "Let's get better footage first, so we know exactly what we're reporting." The crowd on the shore had grown, curious about the drone's extended focus on one spot in the river. Some pointed, asking questions. The elderly man, who had mentioned the missing music teacher, stepped forward again. "What'd you find down there?" he asked, eyes narrowed against the sun. "Looks like there might be a car submerged in the river," Mason answered, still focused on the screen. "We're trying to get a better look." At those words, a murmur ran through the gathering. Someone whispered, "Emma Harrison," and the name spread like ripples on water. A middle-aged woman pushed forward, her face suddenly pale. "Did you say a car? What kind? What color?" Her voice trembled with urgency. Liam adjusted the drone's position, trying to capture more detail. "Hard to tell with the silt, but it's a smaller vehicle. Sedan, maybe. Might be bluish, but it's been underwater a long time." The woman's hand flew to her mouth. Without another word, she pulled out her phone and stepped away from the crowd, dialing with shaking fingers. Mason, sensing the shift in mood, turned to the elderly man. "The missing music teacher you mentioned, did she drive a blue car?" The man nodded slowly. "Blue Honda. Went missing 16 years back. Never found her or the car." He pointed a gnarled finger toward the river. "Some said she went in the water, but they searched and found nothing." Mason and Liam exchanged glances, the significance of their discovery suddenly clear. This wasn't just another piece of river debris. This might be the answer to a question that had haunted Pinewood Hollow for over a decade. "We need to contact the authorities," Mason said, his voice low and serious. "Muck." "Liam, keep the drone up. Get as much footage as you can." Within 30 minutes, sheriff's vehicles arrived, lights flashing against the morning sun. Sheriff David Carter, who had taken over 5 years after Emma disappeared, stepped out, face grim beneath his hat. Deputies began stretching yellow tape, pushing onlookers back from the riverbank. Mason approached, introducing himself and Liam. "We were documenting the bridge structure when our drone spotted what appears to be a submerged vehicle downstream." He showed the sheriff the footage on their tablet. "Given what locals are saying, we thought you should know immediately." The sheriff studied the footage intently, jaw tightening. "Where exactly is this located?" Liam pointed downstream. "About 20 yards from the bridge toward that bend. It's in deeper water, probably why it wasn't found before." Sheriff Carter nodded, already issuing orders to deputies. "Call the county dive team. Tell them it's priority 1. He turned back to Mason. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. This might be connected to a long-standing missing persons case." Word spread through Pinewood Hollow like wildfire. By noon, dozens of residents lined the riverbank, held back by deputies and yellow tape. Among them stood Sarah Harrison, now in her 60s, her face lined with years of grief and waiting. Michael stood beside her, one arm around her shoulders, his expression a mixture of hope and dread. The county dive team arrived within the hour, setting up equipment on the riverbank. 2 divers in black wetsuits checked oxygen tanks and communication devices, while others prepared recovery equipment. The team leader studied the drone footage, mapping the exact location of the submerged vehicle. "Depth looks to be about 15 feet, he said, pointing to markers on his equipment. "Visibility will be poor. We'll need to attach cables and pull it to shallower water before we can fully examine it." The divers entered the water just after 1 p.m., disappearing beneath the surface with barely a ripple. On shore, the crowd fell silent, watching the river as if it might suddenly reveal its secrets. Sarah Harrison clutched her son's hand, whispering prayers under her breath. Underwater, the divers' lights cut through the murky darkness, illuminating swirling silt and aquatic plants. They descended slowly, following the riverbed downstream from the bridge. Their helmet cameras transmitted grainy images to monitors on shore, where Sheriff Carter and the recovery team watched intently. After several minutes, one diver's voice crackled through the radio. "Visual on target. Confirmed vehicle, sedan type, heavily silted." The camera showed a dark shape emerging from the gloom, a car resting on its wheels in the riverbed, its once blue paint now covered in sediment and algae. The diver moved closer, wiping silt from the license plate. Though corroded, some numbers were still visible. Partial plate visible. Alpha November 7. On shore, a deputy checked the records on a laptop. He looked up, face pale. Matches the Harrison vehicle. Blue Honda Civic, Tennessee plate, AN734J. Sarah's knees buckled. Michael caught her, easing her onto a folding chair provided by a deputy. Her face was ashen, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. 16 years of uncertainty crystallized into a single devastating moment of confirmation. The divers worked methodically, attaching cables to the car's frame. Vehicle secured. Beginning extraction procedure. On shore, a winch whirred to life, cables pulling taut. The water churned as the car slowly shifted, silt clouding the water. The crowd held their collective breath, many filming with phones, despite deputies' requests to stop. This wasn't just a recovery operation. It was a moment of historical significance for Pinewood Hollow. As the car inched towards shore, something floated free from the open driver's side window, a small fabric item, waterlogged and discolored. It drifted to the surface, spinning slowly in the current. A diver retrieved it, holding it up to his helmet camera. "See, appears to be a small purse or wallet." The image appeared on the monitor and Sarah gasped. "That's Emma's. I gave it to her for her birthday." Her voice broke on the last word, decades of pain flooding through. Sheriff Carter approached the Harrison family, his voice gentle but professional. "Mrs. Harrison, Michael, I know this is difficult, but I need to prepare you. Based on the location and condition of the vehicle, we believe Emma may still be inside. Would you like to wait somewhere more private?" Sarah straightened in her chair, wiping tears with a tissue offered by a deputy. "No, I've waited 16 years. I'll stay until my daughter comes home." The extraction continued, painfully slow. The car emerged inch by inch, water cascading from windows and doors, revealing the blue paint beneath years of sediment. When the roof finally broke the surface, a hushed silence fell over the crowd. The Honda, once a symbol of Emma's independence, now represented the end of hope that she might still be alive somewhere. As the car reached shallow water, medical examiner Dr. Rebecca Chen approached in full protective gear. Sheriff Carter held up a hand, stopping the recovery team. "This is now an active crime scene. Only essential personnel beyond this point." The sheriff turned to the crowd. "I need everyone to step back. This is a difficult moment for the Harrison family. Please show respect by giving them privacy." Deputies widened the perimeter, gently moving onlookers further from the scene. News vans had arrived, cameras filming from a distance, reporters speaking in hushed tones about the discovery that might solve one of Tennessee's enduring mysteries. Dr. Chen carefully approached the vehicle, examining the exterior before peering through the driver's side window. After a moment, she stepped back and nodded to Sheriff Carter. Her expression, even behind her protective mask, conveyed what everyone feared. The sheriff approached the Harrison family again, removing his hat. "Mrs. Harrison, Michael, I'm deeply sorry to confirm that we've found human remains in the vehicle. We believe it's Emma, but formal identification will require further examination." Sarah's face crumpled, a wail escaping her lips that seemed to carry 16 years of suspended grief. Michael held her tightly, his own tears falling freely now. The sound cut through the hushed crowd, many turning away, unable to bear witness to such raw pain. "Can I see her?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "Please, I need to see my daughter." Sheriff Carter shook his head gently. "Not yet, Mrs. Harrison. We need to process the scene properly. I promise we'll treat Emma with the utmost respect and dignity." "Ndadi." As the recovery team continued their work, now moving with the careful precision of crime scene technicians, Mason and Liam stood apart from the crowd, their bridge documentation forgotten. What had begun as a routine historical project had turned into a pivotal moment for a grieving family and an entire community. "We came to preserve history," Mason said quietly, "not uncover tragedy." Liam nodded, watching as technicians erected privacy screens around the vehicle. But sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. At least now they might find answers. The news spread beyond Pinewood Hollow by evening, regional stations interrupting regular programming. Breaking news from Tennessee. Historians may have solved the 16-year-old disappearance of music teacher Emma Harrison. And footage of the blue Honda being winched from the river played on screens across the state, alongside Emma's photograph and interviews with former students, now adults, who remembered the kind teacher who had vanished without a trace. In the days that followed, the medical examiner confirmed through dental records that the remains were indeed Emma Harrison's. Forensic analysis revealed unexpected details. A severe fracture to the back of her skull that couldn't be explained by the car's submersion alone, and damage to the Honda's rear bumper, suggesting it had been struck from behind with significant force. Sheriff Carter called a press conference outside the department, addressing the gathered media and concerned citizens. Based on forensic evidence, we're reclassifying Emma Harrison's case from a missing person to a homicide investigation. The vehicle shows signs of having been deliberately forced off the road near Blackwater Creek Bridge. The statement sent shockwaves through Pinewood Hollow. What many had assumed was a tragic accident, a young woman losing control on a dark road, now appeared to be something far more sinister. Someone had wanted Emma Harrison dead, and for 16 years they had walked free while her car lay hidden beneath the Cumberland's waters. Investigators began re-examining evidence from 2008, interviewing original witnesses and following new leads. They created a timeline of Emma's final evening, tracing her movements from the community center to Blackwater Creek Bridge. Deputies canvassed the area, seeking anyone who might have seen something that night but never came forward. One key piece of evidence emerged from Emma's recovered phone. Though damaged by years underwater, forensic technicians managed to extract data from its memory chip. Among the recovered information was a text message Emma had begun typing but never sent, addressed to her mother. "Someone's following me since I left. Looks like Sheriff Moore." The message ended abruptly, never completed or delivered. But those final words, Sheriff Moore, pointed to a shocking possibility. Sheriff Morgan, who had led the original investigation into Emma's disappearance, might have been the last person to see her alive. By then, Jack Morgan had retired 5 years earlier, living in a cabin on the outskirts of town. He had served as Pinewood Hollow's sheriff for nearly 20 years, respected and trusted by most residents. The idea that he might be involved in Emma's death seemed unthinkable to many. When confronted with the recovered text message, current Sheriff Carter's expression was grim. "We follow the evidence, no matter where it leads or who it implicates. No one is above suspicion." For the Harrison family, this potential betrayal cut deeper than they could have imagined. Sarah recalled how Sheriff Morgan had sat in her living room, promising to do everything possible to find Emma, how he had eventually advised her to accept that her daughter might never be found. Had he known all along exactly where Emma was? Michael, reviewing the original case files obtained through legal requests, found disturbing patterns. Reports of a vehicle following Emma that night had been noted, but never thoroughly investigated. Witnesses who mentioned seeing the sheriff's patrol car near Blackwater Creek Bridge around the time of Emma's disappearance had their statements buried in supplementary files. Most damning was the dive team's report from 2008. The original search had covered the area directly beneath and immediately around the bridge, but not the section of river where the Honda was eventually found. Had Sheriff Morgan deliberately directed the search away from where he knew the car would be? As evidence mounted, the community's trust fractured. Those who had known Morgan for decades defended him fiercely. Others, revisiting interactions through a new lens, recalled troubling incidents, his quick dismissal of certain leads, his pressure on the Harrison family to move on, his insistence that Emma had likely left town voluntarily. The case that had haunted Pinewood Hollow for 16 years was no longer just about finding a missing woman. It had become a question of betrayed trust and corrupted authority. The very person entrusted with solving the mystery might have been its architect all along. Mason and Liam, whose historical project had inadvertently broken open the case, found themselves remaining in Pinewood Hollow longer than planned. Their drone footage became key evidence, and their testimony about the discovery was formally recorded. What began as documentation of a Depression-era bridge had become documentation of something far more significant: the unraveling of a 16-year-old crime that had shaped an entire community's identity. As Pinewood Hollow grappled with these revelations, one question echoed through conversations at the diner, the hardware store, and front porches throughout town. If Sheriff Morgan had indeed killed Emma Harrison, why? What possible motive could drive a respected law enforcement officer to murder a beloved music teacher and then spend years pretending to search for her? The answer emerged from an unexpected source. Linda Peterson, who had worked as a secretary at the elementary school where Emma taught, came forward with information she had kept secret for years. Emma came to me concerned about something she'd witnessed, Linda told investigators, her hands trembling as she gave her statement. She'd been working late at the school and saw Sheriff Morgan removing instruments from the music room. Expensive ones. When she confronted him, he claimed he was conducting an inventory for insurance purposes, but she knew that wasn't true. Linda explained that Emma had discovered evidence of a scheme involving Sheriff Morgan and the school's former principal. They had been stealing instruments and other valuable equipment, replacing them with cheaper versions and selling the originals across state lines. When Emma threatened to report what she'd found, the principal resigned suddenly, claiming health issues. She thought that was the end of it, Linda continued. But a week before she disappeared, she told me Morgan had threatened her, said if she ever mentioned what she saw to anyone, she'd regret it. I urged her to report it to state police, but she wanted proof first. This revelation provided the missing piece, motive. Emma Harrison hadn't been randomly targeted. She had discovered corruption involving a powerful local figure and paid the ultimate price for her integrity. As investigators built their case, they examined Sheriff Morgan's financial records from 2008, finding unexplained deposits coinciding with missing equipment from the school. They discovered connections to music stores in neighboring states where stolen instruments had been sold. The scheme had continued for years after Emma's death, suggesting her murder had successfully silenced the one person who might have exposed it. For Sarah and Michael Harrison, learning why Emma died brought a complex mixture of emotions. The pain of knowing she had been deliberately targeted was balanced against finally understanding what had happened that June night in 2008, the mystery that had consumed their lives for 16 years was nearing resolution. Though the wound of Emma's loss would never fully heal, she died because she stood up for what was right, Michael told reporters outside the sheriff's office. That was who Emma was. She never backed down from doing the right thing, even when it was difficult or dangerous. Sarah, standing beside him, nodded through her tears. My daughter's voice was silenced for 16 years, but now she's finally being heard. On the morning of June 3rd, 2024, Cumberland County Courthouse stood imposing against the clear Tennessee sky. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes extended like strange flowers. Reporters clutched microphones, delivering updates to cameras with the courthouse steps as backdrop. The once sleepy town of Pinewood Hollow had become the focus of national attention. Inside, the arrest warrant for former Sheriff Jack Morgan was being processed. The evidence had mounted to an undeniable level. Paint from his department vehicle on Emma's Honda, financial records showing unexplained income, witness statements about threats made to Emma, and most damning, her final unfinished text message naming him as the person following her that night. State Police Captain Laura Reeves coordinated with current Sheriff Carter, planning the arrest carefully. Morgan was no ordinary suspect. As a former law enforcement officer with extensive knowledge of police procedures and deep connections throughout the county, he presented unique challenges. "We do this by the book," Captain Reeves instructed the assembled officers. "No shortcuts, no mistakes. This case has waited 16 years. We cannot risk any procedural errors." At 10:15 a.m., 3 unmarked vehicles pulled up to Morgan's cabin on the outskirts of town. The modest wood structure sat on 5 acres of pine forest, isolated from neighbors. A weathered American flag hung limply from a pole on the front porch, and a patrol car from Morgan's sheriff days sat in the gravel driveway, meticulously maintained despite being over 2 decades old. Officers approached cautiously, weapons ready but not drawn. Captain Reeves led, climbing the 3 wooden steps to the porch and knocking firmly on the door. "Jack Morgan, State Police. We have a warrant for your arrest." Silence followed. She knocked again, louder. "Mr. Morgan, please open the door." When no response came, she signaled to the officers. They moved into position, prepared to breach the entrance. Just as they readied themselves, the door creaked open. Jack Morgan stood in the doorway, aged beyond his 67 years. His once commanding presence had diminished, shoulders slightly stooped, but his eyes remained sharp. He wore pressed khaki pants and a button-up shirt, as if he'd been expecting them. "I've been waiting for you," he said simply, no surprise in his voice. "Figured it was just a matter of time after they found the car." Captain Reeves stepped forward. "Jack Morgan, you're under arrest for the murder of Emma Harrison. You have the right to remain silent." As she continued reading his rights, Morgan stood unnaturally still, neither resisting nor showing emotion. When she finished, he merely nodded and extended his wrists for the handcuffs. The metal clicked into place, securing the man who had once been the most respected figure in Pinewood Hollow. "My wallet and keys are on the table," he said calmly. "Lock up when you leave." The officers escorted him to the waiting vehicle, his composure never wavering. Neighbors who had gathered at the commotion watched in stunned silence as the former sheriff was placed in the back seat of a state police car. Some turned away, unable to process the sight. Others filmed with phones, documenting the fall of a man once considered Pinewood Hollow's guardian. Word of Morgan's arrest spread instantly. By noon, crowds had gathered outside the Cumberland County Detention Center where he was being processed. Some held signs demanding justice for Emma. Others stood in silent disbelief, struggling to reconcile the trusted sheriff they had known with the murderer he was accused of being. Sarah and Michael Harrison received the news in their family home. Sheriff Carter had called personally, wanting them to hear it from him before media reports broke. He didn't resist, Carter told them. Barely said a word during processing. Sarah sat heavily in her chair, clutching a framed photo of Emma. "Does he show any remorse? Any at all?" "Hard to tell," Carter replied honestly. "He's calm. Too calm, maybe." Michael paced the living room, energy coursing through him. "When's the arraignment?"
"Tomorrow morning."
The DA is pushing for no bail, given the severity of the charges and his law enforcement background. After Sheriff Carter left, Sarah and Michael sat in silence, the weight of the moment settling around them. For 16 years, they had lived with questions, with grief suspended in uncertainty. Now, as answers emerged, they faced a new reality. The person who had promised to find Emma had been responsible for her death all along. "I shook his hand," Michael said finally, his voice hollow. "Year after year, I thanked him for his help, for his dedication to finding Emma." Sarah reached for her son's hand. "We all trusted him. The whole town did." That trust, so completely betrayed, became the central theme as news of Morgan's arrest dominated regional headlines. "Former sheriff arrested for 2008 cold case murder," read the Knoxville Daily. "Small town shocked, trusted lawman charged in music teacher's death," proclaimed the Nashville Tribune. Reporters interviewed longtime Pinewood Hollow residents, capturing their struggle to process this revelation. Pastor Jim Williams of First Baptist Church, where Morgan had attended services for over 30 years, spoke with visible emotion. "We're wrestling with something unimaginable," he told the cameras. "How do you reconcile the man who helped build our community center with someone capable of such darkness? We're praying for the Harrison family, but also for understanding." Former deputies who had served under Morgan expressed similar confusion. Deputy Tom Wilkins, now retired, shook his head in disbelief during an interview. "I worked alongside Jack for 15 years. Never saw this coming. Makes you question your judgment of character." The morning of the arraignment dawned with unusual clarity. The courthouse steps were packed with onlookers and media. Inside, the small courtroom could barely contain those who had secured seats. Sarah and Michael sat in the front row, supported by friends and Emma's former colleagues. When Morgan was led in, handcuffed and wearing a county-issued jumpsuit, a hush fell over the room. He kept his eyes forward, never glancing at the Harrison family or responding to the whispers that followed his entrance. Judge Martha Simmons presided, her stern demeanor setting the tone. Case number 24 CR 7382, State of Tennessee versus Jack Morgan. Charges: first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, abuse of official capacity, and evidence tampering. Morgan's court-appointed attorney, Martin Green, stood beside his client. Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to all charges. The plea sent ripples through the courtroom. Many had expected, perhaps hoped, that Morgan would confess, sparing the community the pain of a trial and providing immediate closure for the Harrison family. District Attorney Eleanor Walsh requested Morgan be held without bail, citing the severity of the charges and his intimate knowledge of law enforcement procedures. Your Honor, the defendant not only committed murder, but used his position as sheriff to cover it up for 16 years. He represents an extraordinary flight risk. Judge Simmons considered briefly before ruling. Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in custody pending trial. Though, as Morgan was led away, he finally turned, his eyes meeting Sarah Harrison's for a brief moment. His expression remained unreadable, but Sarah later described it as empty, like looking at a stranger wearing a familiar face. Outside the courthouse, D.A. Walsh addressed the gathered press. This case represents one of the most serious breaches of public trust imaginable. A law enforcement officer sworn to protect his community is alleged to have taken a young woman's life and then led the very investigation meant to find her killer. The state will pursue justice for Emma Harrison with every resource at our disposal. In the weeks that followed, investigators continued building their case. They interviewed former students and colleagues from the elementary school, confirming Emma's discovery of the instrument theft scheme. Financial audits revealed over $200,000 worth of musical equipment had disappeared during Morgan's time as sheriff, with corresponding deposits to offshore accounts linked to him. Linda Peterson's testimony proved crucial. She provided emails from Emma expressing concern about the sheriff's reaction when confronted. He didn't deny it, Emma had written. He just stared at me and said I should be careful about making accusations I couldn't prove. If Morgan maintained his silence, speaking only to his attorney. He offered no explanation, no confession, no expression of remorse. This silence further unsettled the community, leaving them without the answers they desperately sought. As the case proceeded toward trial, Pinewood Hollow struggled to heal. Town meetings became forums for processing collective grief and betrayal. Mayor Patricia Wilson established a community counseling program, recognizing the psychological impact of learning a trusted authority figure had committed such a terrible crime. We're not just mourning Emma anymore, Mayor Wilson explained at a town hall meeting. We're mourning our sense of security, our belief in the systems meant to protect us. That's a different kind of grief. The elementary school where Emma had taught established a permanent memorial. The music room was renamed the Emma Harrison Studio, and a plaque detailed her dedication to students and her courage in standing up against corruption. Her former piano was restored and placed prominently in the room, a symbol of the music that had been central to her life. Mason and Liam from Heritage Builders completed their documentation of Blackwater Creek Bridge, but with an additional focus. They created a digital memorial, combining their architectural recordings with Emma's story, ensuring that future generations would understand the bridge's significance beyond its structural elements. History isn't just about buildings and dates, Mason explained during the memorial's unveiling. It's about the human stories connected to these places. Emma's story is now part of this bridge's legacy, a reminder that truth may be submerged for years, but eventually it rises to the surface. As summer turned to fall, preparations for Morgan's trial intensified. The prosecution built a meticulous case, reconstructing the events of June 12, 2008. Traffic camera footage from neighboring towns, though grainy and incomplete, showed Morgan's patrol car heading toward Blackwater Creek Bridge shortly after Emma left the community center. Forensic analysis of the recovered Honda revealed impact patterns consistent with being struck from behind by a vehicle of the same height and width as a police cruiser. The damage suggested Emma's car had been forced off the road deliberately, sending it through the bridge's guardrail and into the Cumberland River. Most damning was the recovered data from Emma's phone. Digital forensics experts managed to retrieve not only the unfinished text naming Sheriff Morgan, but also photos Emma had taken of school inventory records, apparently documenting discrepancies between listed instruments and those actually present. On November 12, 2024, almost 6 months after the discovery of Emma's car, Jack Morgan's trial began. The courthouse overflowed with spectators and media. The case had captured national attention, featured on true crime programs, and becoming a symbol of corrupted authority. District Attorney Walsh delivered a powerful opening statement, her voice resonating through the hushed courtroom. 16 years ago, Emma Harrison was a young woman with dreams, talent, and courage. When she discovered theft occurring at her school, she didn't look away. She stood up for what was right, even when it meant confronting the most powerful figure in Pinewood Hollow. Walsh moved closer to the jury box, her expression solemn. For that courage she paid with her life. The evidence will show that Jack Morgan, then sheriff of this county, followed Emma Harrison on the night of June 12, 2008, forced her car off Blackwater Creek Bridge, and then used his position to ensure her body would never be found. He led searchers away from where he knew she was. He dismissed witnesses who reported seeing his patrol car. He built a wall of authority around his crime, believing it would protect him forever. The prosecution presented witness after witness, building a timeline of Emma's final evening and Morgan's actions. Former deputies testified about Morgan's strange behavior following Emma's disappearance, how he had seemed oddly certain she wouldn't be found. Linda Peterson's testimony brought many in the courtroom to tears as she described Emma's growing fear in the weeks before her death. She told me she'd seen Morgan watching her house from his patrol car. When I suggested she report it, she said, "Who would I report the sheriff to? Arna." The defense strategy focused on creating reasonable doubt, suggesting alternative scenarios, and highlighting the circumstantial nature of some evidence. Attorney Green questioned the reliability of 16-year-old memories and argued that Morgan's actions during the investigation, while perhaps incompetent, didn't prove murder. Throughout the proceedings, Morgan sat impassively, rarely speaking even to his attorney. His stillness was unsettling, as if he were merely observing events that had nothing to do with him. On the trial's 5th day, in a stunning development, Martin Green approached the bench, requesting a brief recess to confer with his client. When court resumed 30 minutes later, Green addressed Judge Simmons. "Your Honor, my client wishes to change his plea." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Sarah Harrison gripped Michael's hands so tightly her knuckles whitened. Judge Simmons leaned forward. "Mr. Morgan, do you wish to change your plea at this time?" Morgan stood slowly, his voice clear but devoid of emotion. "Yes, Your Honor. I plead guilty to the murder of Emma Harrison." "Are you making this plea voluntarily, without coercion?" "I am." "Do you understand that by pleading guilty, you waive your right to a trial by jury?" "I do." Judge Simmons turned to the prosecutor. "Ms. Walsh, does the state accept this change of plea?" Walsh conferred briefly with her team before responding. "Yes, Your Honor, with the condition that Mr. Morgan provide a full account of his actions regarding Emma Harrison's death." The judge addressed Morgan again. "Mr. Morgan, are you willing to provide a complete statement regarding the events of June 12, 2008? For the first time, Morgan's composure wavered slightly. "Yes," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's time." The courtroom fell silent as Morgan began speaking, his words careful and measured. He confirmed what the investigation had pieced together. Emma had discovered his scheme to steal and sell musical instruments from the school. When confronting him hadn't stopped the thefts, she had gathered evidence, planning to take it to state authorities. "I followed her that night," Morgan admitted. "I knew she had documentation on her phone and in her car. I intended to frighten her, to make it clear what would happen if she didn't drop it. But when I turned on my lights to pull her over, she accelerated." Morgan described pursuing Emma to Blackwater Creek Bridge, where he rammed her car from behind. "I wanted to disable her vehicle, not send it off the bridge. But she lost control, crashed through the railing. I watched the car sink." His voice remained steady as he described his actions afterward, directing searches away from the actual location, burying witness statements that mentioned his patrol car, and creating a narrative that Emma had likely left town voluntarily. "I told myself it was an accident," he concluded, "that I never meant for her to die. But every decision after that was deliberate. Every lie, every misdirection. I've lived with that knowledge for 16 years. When Morgan finished, silence hung heavy in the courtroom. Judge Simmons looked toward the Harrison family. "Mrs. Harrison, Mr. Harrison, would you like to address the court before I accept this plea?" Sarah stood slowly, supported by Michael. Her voice trembled but gained strength as she spoke. "For 16 years, I've imagined countless scenarios about what happened to my daughter. None were as painful as learning the truth, that the person we trusted to find her was the one who took her from us." She looked directly at Morgan for the first time. "You watched me grieve. You sat in my living room and promised to do everything possible to find Emma. You attended her memorial service. That level of deception is almost impossible to comprehend." Sarah paused, gathering herself. "But today, at least, you finally told the truth. It doesn't bring Emma back. It doesn't erase 16 years of unnecessary pain. But it's something. A small measure of justice in a situation where complete justice is impossible." Judge Simmons accepted Morgan's guilty plea and scheduled sentencing for the following month. As Morgan was led from the courtroom, the community of Pinewood Hollow began the difficult process of reconciling the trusted sheriff they had known with the criminal he had revealed himself to be. The sentencing hearing on December 18th was brief but powerful. Judge Simmons delivered the maximum penalty, life imprisonment without possibility of parole. "This court cannot imagine a more severe breach of public trust," she stated. "You used your position not only to take a life, but to conceal your crime for 16 years, prolonging the suffering of Emma Harrison's family and this entire community." As Morgan was escorted from the courthouse for the final time, a light snow began falling, the first of the season. Sarah and Michael stood on the steps, surrounded by supporters holding candles despite the daylight, a symbol of the light Emma had brought to their lives. "It's over," Sarah whispered, watching the prisoner transport vehicle disappear down the street. "She can rest now. We all can." In the months that followed, Pinewood Hollow began healing, though the scars would always remain. The community established the Emma Harrison Foundation for Music Education, providing instruments and lessons to children who couldn't afford them. The foundation specifically targeted the issue of educational funding transparency, ensuring that resources meant for students would reach them. Blackwater Creek Bridge was renovated with a permanent memorial plaza at its entrance. A bronze statue depicted Emma with her violin, positioned so she appeared to be looking out over the Cumberland River. The plaque read, "Emma Harrison, teacher, musician, truth seeker. Her courage reminds us that injustice cannot stay hidden forever." On the first anniversary of Emma's recovery from the river, the community gathered for a concert at the elementary school. Students past and present performed pieces Emma had taught, their music filling the auditorium where she had once inspired young musicians. Sarah, seated in the front row, closed her eyes as the violins played, a peaceful expression replacing the grief that had marked her face for so many years. Michael, now with 2 children of his own, had established a scholarship for music students planning to teach in rural schools. Emma believed music could transform lives, he told a local reporter. This scholarship ensures her work continues through new generations of teachers. Mason and Liam's documentation of Blackwater Creek Bridge became part of a larger project, examining how communities process trauma connected to physical landmarks. Their work invited discussions about collective memory, justice, and healing. The case sparked reforms in law enforcement oversight across Tennessee. New protocols required external agencies to review missing persons cases involving potential conflicts of interest. The state also established stronger whistleblower protections for those reporting misconduct by authority figures. For the people of Pinewood Hollow, the legacy of Emma Harrison evolved from a haunting mystery to a powerful lesson about courage and accountability. Parents told their children not just about the tragedy of her death, but about her refusal to remain silent in the face of wrongdoing. In the final analysis, Emma's story revealed painful truths about human nature and institutions. It showed how authority could be corrupted and trust betrayed. But it also demonstrated how truth, though sometimes submerged for years, eventually finds its way to the surface. The Cumberland River continued flowing beneath Blackwater Creek Bridge, its waters carrying new stories forward while honoring those of the past. And in Pinewood Hollow, a community forever changed by loss and betrayal learned that healing begins not with forgetting, but with facing truth and choosing, deliberately and collectively, to build something meaningful from the broken pieces. As Sarah Harrison told the students at the memorial concert, Emma's life was cut short, but her impact continues through each of you. When you stand up for what's right, when you use your talents to bring beauty into the world, when you refuse to let injustice go unchallenged, you carry her spirit forward. That's how we honor her, not just by remembering what was lost, but by creating what can still be. In that small Tennessee town, marked by tragedy but not defined by it, Emma Harrison's legacy became not just a memory of injustice, but a catalyst for change, a reminder that even the deepest secrets cannot stay buried forever, and that courage, though it sometimes comes at a terrible cost, leaves an indelible mark on the world. 5 years after Morgan's sentencing, Pinewood Hollow had transformed. The town that once seemed frozen by a tragic mystery now pulsed with renewed purpose. On the anniversary of Emma's discovery, the community gathered not just to remember, but to celebrate how far they had come. The Emma Harrison Music Center stood where once there had been only an abandoned storefront on Main Street. Its modern glass facade contrasted with the historic buildings flanking it, symbolizing how the town had learned to blend remembrance with progress. Inside, practice rooms hummed with the sounds of violins, pianos, and voices, Emma's legacy continuing through a new generation of musicians. Sarah Harrison, now in her 70s, stood on the center's steps, surrounded by students clutching instruments. Her hair had turned completely white, but her eyes held a peaceful strength that had emerged from her long journey through grief. 5 years ago, we finally learned the truth about what happened to my daughter. She addressed the gathered crowd, her voice clear in the autumn air. Today I want to talk not about how Emma was taken from us, but about what she gave us, her passion for music, her courage to stand for truth, and most importantly, her belief that one person can make a difference. The crowd applauded, many wiping away tears. Among them stood Michael with his family, his daughter Emmeline, now 12, and already an accomplished violinist. Beside them were Mason and Liam, whose work documenting Blackwater Creek Bridge had evolved into an ongoing historical project preserving Pinewood Hollow's transformation. Emma's story could have ended in that river, Sarah continued, but instead it sparked something remarkable. Look around you, music scholarships, justice reform initiatives, community watchdog programs. From our darkest moment came our greatest light. Now it is Eisenmann says so. The Emma Harrison Foundation had grown beyond music education, now supporting whistleblower protection programs and rural arts initiatives across Tennessee. The foundation's work had helped expose corruption in 3 other counties, its investigators trained to recognize the warning signs that had been missed in Emma's case. After the ceremony, visitors toured the music center, admiring the Wall of Courage, a gallery featuring stories of individuals who, like Emma, had stood up against wrongdoing despite personal risk. The wall included both famous figures and ordinary citizens, reinforcing the idea that courage could be found everywhere. In the center's main performance hall, a special concert commemorated the anniversary. Students performed original compositions inspired by Emma's story, each piece capturing an aspect of her journey, from her early passion for music to her final brave stand against corruption. The highlight came when Emmeline Harrison took the stage, violin in hand. The audience fell silent as the 12-year-old, the spitting image of her aunt with the same auburn hair and determined expression, began to play. The composition, titled Truth Rises, moved from dark, turbulent passages to a soaring, hopeful conclusion that left many in tears. Afterward, at a community dinner in the town square, conversations buzzed about how Pinewood Hollow had changed. Mayor Patricia Wilson, now in her second term, raised a toast. 5 years ago, we learned that our trusted sheriff had betrayed us in the worst possible way. We could have let that destroy our faith in each other. Instead, we chose to rebuild not just our institutions, but our connections as neighbors. The changes were evident everywhere. The sheriff's department, once a closed system under Morgan's control, now operated with unprecedented transparency. Civilian oversight committees reviewed all major cases. Body cameras were mandatory, and perhaps most importantly, a culture of questioning authority had replaced blind trust. Sheriff David Carter, who had overseen Morgan's arrest, spoke candidly about the transformation. What happened here wasn't just about one corrupt official. It was about a system that allowed secrets to stay buried. We've rebuilt from the ground up, knowing that true safety comes from accountability, not authority. The Cumberland River Watershed Association, inspired by how heritage builders had discovered Emma's car, now conducted regular surveys of the river. Their work had not only improved environmental conditions, but had helped solve 3 other cold cases in neighboring counties, abandoned vehicles discovered with their drone technology. Mason Campbell, now a professor of historical preservation at the State University, reflected on the unexpected impact of their bridge documentation project. We came to Pinewood Hollow to preserve history. Instead, we became part of it. It taught us that preservation isn't just about structures, it's about stories, truth, and justice. As evening fell, the community gathered at Blackwater Creek Bridge for the most poignant part of the anniversary. The bridge, once a symbol of tragedy, had been reclaimed, its weathered wood replaced with modern materials, its approaches widened and beautified with gardens. At its center stood Emma's statue, violin poised as if about to play. One by one, people placed candles along the bridge railing, creating a river of light above the water that had hidden the truth for so long. As darkness descended, hundreds of flames flickered against the night, reflecting in the Cumberland's surface. Sarah Harrison, standing at the spot where Emma's car had broken through 16 years earlier, released a small paper lantern into the night sky. It rose slowly, carrying a message she had written to her daughter. Others followed suit, dozens of lanterns drifting upward like earthbound stars seeking their place in the heavens. "This bridge once divided our story into before and after," Sarah said softly to those around her. "Now it connects them." The healing that had taken place in Pinewood Hollow rippled outward, inspiring other communities facing similar traumas. Delegations from towns across the country visited to learn how Pinewood had transformed its tragedy into positive change. The case study became required reading in criminal justice programs nationwide. The Morgan deception, as it became known, illustrated how authority could be corrupted and how communities could rebuild afterward. Law enforcement agencies implemented Pinewood protocols for cases involving potential conflicts of interest. Jack Morgan, serving his life sentence at Tennessee State Penitentiary, became a footnote rather than the defining figure in the story. When reporters sought interviews, hoping for deeper insights into his motivations, he consistently declined. His silence continued to frustrate those seeking complete understanding, but Pinewood Hollow had learned to move forward without his explanations. Linda Peterson, whose testimony had been crucial in convicting Morgan, received the first Emma Harrison Courage Award. The annual honor recognized individuals who spoke truth to power, despite personal risk. At the ceremony, Linda reflected on the weight of secrets. "For 16 years, I carried the burden of what I knew," she admitted. "I told myself it was too late, that speaking up wouldn't bring Emma back. I was wrong. Truth matters, no matter how long delayed. I only wish I'd had Emma's courage sooner." Her candor inspired others to come forward with information about unresolved cases and corruption throughout the region. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation established a specialized cold case unit focusing on potential official misconduct, naming it Operation Rising Truth in reference to Emma's story. The music program at Pinewood Elementary flourished under renewed attention and funding. Where once instruments had been stolen and resources dwindled, now every child had access to quality education in the arts. The school's orchestra, renamed Emma's Ensemble, performed at state competitions, often winning with their passionate interpretations. One young violinist, when asked about her inspiration, told a reporter, "Miss Harrison never got to teach me, but she teaches me every day." Her story shows us that music isn't just about notes. It's about having the courage to play your own song, even when it's difficult. Technology played a role in preserving Emma's legacy as well. An augmented reality app developed by local students allowed visitors to experience the history of the case while standing at significant locations around town. At Blackwater Creek Bridge, users could see a timeline of events, from Emma's disappearance to the discovery of her car and the subsequent investigation. The project's young developers explained their motivation. History shouldn't just be in books. It should be something you can stand in the middle of, something that helps you understand not just what happened, but how it felt to be there. This emphasis on emotional truth characterized Pinewood Hollow's approach to remembrance. Rather than sanitizing the painful aspects of Emma's story, they embraced the full complexity, the betrayal, the grief, the anger, and ultimately the healing. Sarah Harrison collaborated with a grief counselor to establish support groups for families of cold case victims. These meetings, held monthly in the Music Center's community room, provided space for those still waiting for answers. Sarah's journey from uncertainty to truth gave hope to others trapped in the limbo of not knowing. The hardest part wasn't just losing Emma, she told these groups. It was losing her without understanding why, without knowing where she was. That uncertainty becomes its own kind of prison. Finding the truth doesn't erase the pain, but it changes it into something you can finally begin to carry. Michael Harrison, having watched his mother's transformation, established a foundation specifically focused on supporting parents of missing adults, a group often overlooked in victim services. The foundation provided legal assistance, media training, and emotional support to families navigating the complex terrain of adult missing persons cases. When someone over 18 disappears, Michael explained during a national conference on the topic, families often hear, "They're adults, they have the right to leave." But we know that's rarely the full story. Every missing adult is someone's child, someone's sibling, someone's loved one. They deserve the same diligence in searching, the same commitment to finding answers. The conference, held at the newly established Justice and Reconciliation Center in Nashville, brought together law enforcement, victims' advocates, and families from across the country. Emma's case was presented as both a cautionary tale and a source of hope, showing how easily justice could be derailed, but also how persistence could eventually prevail. FBI agent Camila Rodriguez, who had joined the investigation after the car's discovery, addressed the gathering. The Harrison case changed how we approach cold cases involving potential conflicts of interest. It showed us that sometimes the obstacle to solving a case isn't lack of evidence, it's who's controlling that evidence and why. This institutional soul-searching extended to the media as well. Journalists who had accepted Morgan's dismissal of key witnesses now questioned their own role in allowing the truth to remain hidden. Ethics classes in journalism schools used the case to discuss the importance of challenging official narratives, especially in small communities where power often concentrated in few hands. On the personal level, those who had known both Emma and Morgan continued reconciling their memories with the revealed truth. Emma's students, now adults with children of their own, organized an annual music camp in her honor. Many became teachers themselves, carrying forward her patient, encouraging approach to music education. Former deputies who had served under Morgan established a scholarship fund for students pursuing careers in ethical law enforcement. Their motto, "Vigilance begins within," acknowledged that preventing corruption required constant self-examination and willingness to question authority, especially one's own. The transformation extended to physical spaces throughout Pinewood Hollow. The sheriff's office, once Morgan's domain, was renovated to include a public observation area where citizens could watch department operations. The once imposing brick building now featured glass walls and community meeting rooms, symbolizing the new transparency. Even Morgan's cabin, which had stood abandoned after his arrest, found new purpose. Rather than demolishing the site, the community converted it into a retreat center for whistleblowers recovering from the often traumatic experience of exposing wrongdoing. The isolated setting that had once protected secrets now sheltered those who revealed them. Nature itself seemed to participate in the healing. The bend in the Cumberland River, where Emma's car had rested for 16 years, became home to a thriving ecosystem. River scientists noted the unusual diversity of life in that specific section, as if the waters that had concealed truth for so long now nurtured it with particular vigor. On the 5th anniversary evening, as lanterns rose above Blackwater Creek Bridge and candles illuminated its length, Sarah Harrison stood with her arm around Emmeline, watching the lights reflect in the water below. "Your aunt would be so proud of you," she told her granddaughter. "Not just because of your music, but because of who you're becoming." Emmeline, clutching her violin case, looked up at the night sky where the lanterns joined the stars. "Do you think she can see us? All of this?" Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. "I believe she knows. Not just that we found her, but that we found purpose in her story. That's the thing about truth. Once it rises, it changes everything it touches." As the community of Pinewood Hollow gathered on the bridge that had once marked their darkest moment, their collective healing stood as testimony to resilience. They had transformed a story of betrayal into one of courage, a narrative of loss into one of reclamation. Emma Harrison's legacy lived not just in memorials and music, but in a community forever changed by her truth finally rising to the surface. The case that had haunted Tennessee for 16 years had become something else entirely, a lesson in how darkness, when finally confronted, could lead to unexpected light. And in that transformation lay the most powerful truth of all, that even the deepest wounds could heal, not by forgetting the past, but by facing it honestly and choosing deliberately to build something meaningful from what remained. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.